is hostile to vast swaths of the agenda that we feel is important for the American people, including a woman's right to choose, including the rights of minorities, including really the rights of vulnerable people and people who need the government's protection to live their lives in a safe and fulfilling way. His position on the unitary executive, which basically puts the president in charge of everything, all the administrative agencies and even people who've got terms on their offices and everything else, is supposedly an attack on the bureaucracy, but in fact it is an attack on government efforts to make people's lives better. And I think that it's fair to conclude that is pretty frightening, that it would signal a significant change in the way that this government interacts with people. His hostility toward Roe versus Wade is palpable, and I think people who are interested in those issues need to take his candidacy very, very seriously on the merits, whatever else is going on in terms of the confirmation process. And speaking of things that change hour by hour, right. I don't know what's going on because I haven't looked at my phone since I walked in here to start this podcast.
Yeah, and I think I think on Thursday, so Professor Christine Blasey Ford, she accepted the Senate committee's request to testify on her claim, and I think by the time this podcast comes out, she'll have already spoken. But the hearing is tentatively set. I think it's even more than tentatively now set for this Thursday.
I think everything's tentative.
Yeah. So 1 week after the California professor accused the Supreme Court nominee of attempted sexual assault on her when she was in high school, another woman has come forward as well, talking about additional misconduct. My question was, and you talked a little bit about history, do you see this as vastly different between now and the Clarence Thomas hearings when he was being accused of sexual harassment?
This is such a different time compared to that it is absolutely astonishing. And really, even for those of us who can remember those hearings, as I do, find it hard to put ourselves back in that time and compare it to today. The shame that people should have felt in the way that Anita Hill was treated in the Thomas hearings, I hope will lead this process to a more productive way, in a more respectful way. I don't really know whether it will or not. It's so hard. Yogi Berra is famous for saying predictions are so difficult, especially about the future. And so how this is going to play out, I don't know. I do know that when you've got these kinds of very serious allegations against a candidate, ordinarily you would have the FBI not in its crime-solving role, but in its vetting role to provide the appointing authority, for one thing, the White House, with information that they should have, but also providing the Senate with information they should have about a candidate. You would think that's the way to get at it and not have a swearing contest in a congressional hearing room.
I think one of the main differences that is occurring between the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, and the Kavanaugh issue now is that Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, they were both adults when it happened. They were both working together, and this was something that happened over a sustained amount of time, continuously for almost 8 years. And I think the largest aspect is that there's not a movement similar to the Me Too movement that was apparent back then. And I think that if there was something similar to that now, the results would have been, I think, different.
Yeah, that seems right to me. The other odd thing about this is that you've got some people saying, "Oh, it was a youthful indiscretion. Boys will be boys," et cetera, et cetera.
That's so dangerous. Saying something like that is so dangerous.
Yeah.
It is enormously dangerous, and it is so inconsistently applied. I mean, because these are the same people that want to send juveniles up the river for life or for decades and decades for actions that occurred before their brains were fully formed at all. So it seems to me you can't have it both ways. If one person is entitled to some consideration because of their youth or lack of experience, that the same rule ought to be for everybody. Remember the part about equal justice under law?
Oh, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we learned about that.
Off and on, yeah. I hope so. I hope that got squeezed into one of those courses somewhere along the line.
Equality? Equality.
Yeah, I predict the biggest similarity between the two situations is that they both end up on the Supreme Court, in my own cynical view. But we're coming up on time. Can we ask fun questions now?
I have a couple of fun questions.
Now I need to really be on the lookout.
I'll start with a general one, just because, since we are a law school podcast. I mean, did you hate law school? Did you love law school?
Well, I'll talk about law school. This may seem odd or geeky or something. I actually enjoyed the first year of law school. It's hard for me to explain why, except that it was sort of like watching a very intricate machine work and learning a whole new language, learning what so many of the terms meant that you would read in the newspapers, and it was kind of unlocking a whole world for me that I hadn't known anything about. I hadn't had any lawyers in my family, and I thought it was kind of cool, actually. I was in law school with a friend of mine from college, and I remember it was, I think, in March or April that we kind of finally got the message about how miserable we were supposed to be. And these were kind of the bad old days of law school too, where students were occasionally really getting grilled in class, and you had some people who wanted to use the Socratic method to kind of beat up on folks.
Well, they still do that quite a bit, yeah.
What? Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it was worse back then. I don't know.
It was pretty bad from time to time.
Now, when you were a professor, did you use the Socratic method?
I was perfectly behaved in all situations.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's ambiguous language. Perfectly behaved could mean anything.
I will say that looking back on it, when I think about the way that some of these professors worked these very large classes, I don't know what your largest classes were, but
Ours was torts.
Yeah, I've had torts for mine is 60.
Yeah, Hannah and I had torts together, and it was almost 100.
Okay, so so that's about the same. I had some classes that were 100, and I don't know if you've got any professors. I won't ask you on the air whether you do or not, who could kind of take that amphitheater type room and literally kind of play it like an organ. In the sense of, like, if I call on you, I know what kind of answer I'm going to get. If I call on you, I know that I'm going to get a different sort of answer. If I call over here, I'm going to get something else. And to remember all that and to use that to make a point was, I'm just going to say, it's an art. It really is when it's done right. And I think it can be done without humiliating people and without beating up on people, too. So... and then much of second and third year, I actually spent doing clinical legal work. Was in a civil clinic second year and a criminal clinic third year, and actually representing people and appearing in court a lot. And so that's kind of what kept me sane during second and third year.
Appearing in court kept you sane?
It did.
Okay.
It did. It would be because it was an opportunity to interact with real people in real situations, and it wasn't just an abstract intellectual exercise. It's like, how are we going to help you get out of this situation? And so, whether that set me on any particular course or not, I don't know. But it was very gratifying to be able to do that.
I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Colin Kaepernick. For those who don't know who he is a former quarterback with the 49ers who began protesting during the national anthem, protesting what he saw as obvious injustice within our society towards African Americans. And one of the things that happened was actually the Trump, I was going to say Trump administration, but it's more Trump, I guess, specifically.
I think it was himself.
Yes, kind of got into the middle of this. It seems to be kind of playing politics with patriotism. But to me, it seems like it kind of reeks of maybe not specifically violating the First Amendment, but almost intentionally trying to get up to that point of violating someone's First Amendment right without actually doing it. I don't know if do you have concerns about the Trump and the administration, doing things like this where it is near breaking someone's First Amendment rights, or am I completely off basis with my thought process?
How many adjectives am I entitled to on this show?
As many as you would like.
13.
Reprehensible, disgusting, terrifying. Okay, I'll save the other 10.
Okay.
It is almost unimaginable that we are in a situation in which the President of the United States attacks an individual citizen for doing something that is so clearly within their rights, that is so clearly addressing a huge problem in society that the President himself apparently denies exists, that there's any need to do it, that there's any governmental purpose in doing it. And so what I conclude from that is that this is just one of the weapons that are being used to demonize people, to otherize people, to divide people. That there is no legitimate purpose for this, and it is completely unjustified. Is it a First Amendment violation? Not until the government takes some action. And of course, the sports teams, being private enterprise, aren't really capable of infringing on people's First Amendment rights. Right. It's only the government that's able to do that. So it's a sidelong glance or a sidelong attack on the First Amendment. That somebody would be doing that is reprehensible and I think terrifying.
And so at what point, if he actually would, say, do something with his administration to go after the owners of the team, of a team that's protesting, like how far could he go to where he would not be violating the First Amendment right, or what would be that kind of gray line?
There are a couple of negatives in there, but let me say it this way. I mean, the government is not entitled to discriminate against speech based on its content, with very limited exceptions having that don't have any relevance here.
Right.
But it's clearly content based. He's after people because of their protests and not what they're protesting against. So that it's just irrefutable that it's content based, and the government can't do it.
Right.
So it's in that sense pretty simple.
And so, how different is this administration from others that you've seen in terms of shirking the rule of law? So I was a college student during all of the George Bush years, so I remember them very well, and of course all of the Obama years. But I know there's some people in this room who were in college only during the Obama administration and aren't as familiar with prior administrations. Do you see this one as very different from others in terms of just shirking rule of law?
Every administration makes mistakes. Every person makes mistakes. So every person in every administration makes mistakes from time to time. The ACLU has sued every president that has been in office since its existence. And in fact, my predecessor at the ACLU of Minnesota used to brag that he had sued the Obama administration more frequently than he'd sued the George W. Bush administration. So there's always that tension between groups that are trying to protect civil liberties and protect people's rights and the government. I mean, in terms of litigation, suing the government is kind of what we do.
Right.
But this does feel very different to me. This is not something inadvertent. These are not things that are going on in order to achieve some allegedly higher purpose. What this administration is doing in the area of immigration in particular is intentionally putting people in fear. And the Justice Department has admitted this in terms of family separation, that they are intentionally putting people in fear. And you can hear from the president's statements that he is intentionally dividing people. He is encouraging people to hate each other. He is encouraging people to be violent towards each other. That is absolutely different than anything I have ever seen.